The champagne flute hit the marble floor before anyone realized what had happened. Madame Seo Huayan didn't throw it. She simply opened her fingers and let it fall. A slow, deliberate release. The kind that said, I am not losing my temper. I am making a point. And every person in that ballroom heard the crystal shatter against the floor like a gunshot. Then she looked at Nia. Not at her son. Not at the stunned guests in their $10,000 suits. At Nia. Remove her, Madame Seo said. Quiet. Steady. The voice of a woman who had never once raised it because she'd never needed to. Before she embarrasses this family any further. Two security men moved from the wall. 60 years old. Standing in the middle of the Kang Foundation's annual gala, surrounded by politicians and crime bosses and billionaires who had never once looked her in the eye, Nia Okafor felt her hands go completely still at her sides. She had a secret burning a hole through her chest. She had planned to tell him privately. Tonight. After the gala, in the car, somewhere quiet, where it could just be the two of them. But Madame Seo's men were already walking toward her, and Kang Taejun, the man she had spent 20 years standing beside, had not yet moved. She made a decision. She turned and found him across the room. Taejun. Her voice carried. Not loud, just clear. The way a woman speaks when she has finally stopped waiting for permission. I need you to hear something. The ballroom held its breath. And Nia told him, if you've ever loved someone so long, you forgot what it felt like to be chosen. This story is for you. Stay until the end, hit the like button, and drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story has traveled. Nia Okafor learned very early that rooms were not built for her. Not in the obvious, ugly way. Nobody chased her out, nobody blocked the door. It was subtler than that. It was the way conversation shifted when she entered, the way certain eyes moved past her face like she was furniture, the way people smiled just long enough to be polite and then turned back to whoever they'd actually come to talk to. She had spent 60 years learning how to exist inside those rooms anyway, how to stand straight, speak plainly, take up exactly the space she needed and not 1 inch more. Her mother had taught her that. Adiez Okafor, who cleaned other people's houses in Lagos for 20 years without ever once apologizing for her own dignity. You do not beg a room to notice you, her mother used to say. You make yourself impossible to overlook. Nia had built an entire life on that instruction. By the time she was 42, she owned a luxury textile company with clients in 11 countries. She negotiated contracts in 4 languages. She had walked into rooms that didn't want her and walked out with their signatures on her paperwork. She was not naive about power. She understood how it worked, how it moved, who held it, and who merely borrowed it. What she had not fully understood, not until Seoul, was how completely love could rewire a person's sense of what they deserved. She arrived in Korea for a business negotiation during a rainy February. A government-adjacent contract for high-end traditional fabric restoration, the kind of job that required reputation and discretion in equal measure. The meeting was at a private estate outside the city. The man she was supposed to negotiate with sent a proxy for the first 2 hours, which annoyed her, and then appeared himself near the end without explanation, which annoyed her more. Kang Taejun was 38 years old and already carried himself like someone who had never once considered that he might lose. He was tall, controlled, with the kind of face that gave nothing away unless he chose to. He shook her hand, looked at her proposal for exactly 4 minutes, and then approved it without changing a single line. You built this company alone? He asked. My mother helped me name it, Nia said. Everything else was mine. Something shifted slightly in his expression. Not warmth exactly. More like recognition. That should have been the end of it. A handshake, a signed contract, a flight back to Lagos. It was not the end of it. The car he arranged to take her to her hotel broke down 20 minutes into the drive. It was raining hard by then, the kind of rain that doesn't fall so much as collapse from the sky all at once. And both of them stood on the side of the road waiting for another vehicle while their driver made increasingly frantic phone calls. Niall watched the most powerful man she had met in years standing helpless in the rain with his jacket soaked through and his phone dying, and she laughed. She couldn't help it. Taejun looked at her, not angry, something else. This is funny, he said. You approved a $4 million contract without blinking, she said, and you can't find a working car. He was quiet for a moment. Then, very quietly, he laughed too. It was a real laugh, not the practiced, controlled kind she would come to recognize at every formal event, the one that meant nothing. This was something that escaped before he could stop it. The laugh of a man who had forgotten he was allowed to find things funny. That was the moment. She knew it even then, standing in the rain getting her good shoes ruined. She recognized the moment for what it was and felt a faint private alarm because she had built a very careful life, and she understood that this specific kind of beginning could undo all of it. She went back to Lagos. She finished the contract. She told herself it was nothing. 3 months later, Taejun called and asked if she would come to Seoul again. Business, he said. There were more projects, partnership opportunities. He used the language of commerce the way men like him often did when they weren't ready to use any other language. She went. And then she went again. And then one day she was living in Seoul, in a house that he provided, with her daughter Amara enrolled in an international school that was better than anything in Lagos. And Nia was having her first Korean lesson with a teacher who came on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. And she was telling herself this was temporary, this was an arrangement, this was manageable. She was lying to herself. But she did it carefully, in small enough doses that she could almost believe it. Taejun's world was not a clean or simple place. She understood this from the beginning, and she did not pretend otherwise, not even to herself. The Kang organization controlled a significant portion of Korea's underground financial networks. Extortion, protection, construction contracts, import logistics. The empire her father had started and left half-ruined, which Taejun had rebuilt through a combination of ruthlessness and administrative precision that bordered on the artistic. He never lied to her about what he was. That, in a strange way, was one of the reasons she stayed. Most men in his position would have offered her a cleaned-up version of their lives, a fiction she could inhabit without getting her hands dirty. Taejun simply told her what he did and let her decide. He didn't apologize and he didn't explain. "You know what my business is," he said very early on. "Yes," she said, "and you're still here." "Here." "I'm still here," she said. "Don't make me regret it." He almost smiled. Almost. The years accumulated the way years do when you're paying attention to the wrong things. Nia grew her own business from Seoul. She expanded the textile company, added a consulting division, built relationships across East Asia. She was not dependent on him. She made sure of that, with a stubbornness that occasionally frustrated him and that she considered essential to her survival. She raised Amara mostly alone, in the way that mothers in complex relationships often do. Taejun was present, attentive when he was there, generous with time in the way powerful men sometimes are when they've carved out a pocket of ordinary life for themselves. But Nia did the daily work. The school pickups and the homework battles and the long conversations at night when Amara asked difficult questions about why their family looked different from other families. "Because our family is exactly what it is," Nia told her daughter, "and that's enough." She believed it, mostly. The thing she did not talk about, not to anyone, was the marriage. Taejun had never asked. She had never demanded. They had built something large and complicated and real between them, and the absence of a formal structure to hold. It was something she had learned to live with the way you learn to live with a sound in your walls. You know it's there, you've stopped hearing it in the way you once did, but some nights it is very loud. Madame Seo Hwayeon made sure Nia never forgot the sound. Taejun's mother was a woman of extraordinary discipline and zero sentimentality. She had kept the Kang family together through his father's deterioration and death, through a hostile takeover attempt from a rival family, through a police investigation that came close enough to their doors that Nia could feel the air change for 3 months. Madame Seo had handled all of it from behind the scenes, applying pressure in exactly the right places, never once raising her voice. She was, Nia recognized, a genuinely formidable person. She was also a woman who had decided 20 years ago that Nia Okafor was a problem to be managed until she could be removed. She didn't express this violently. She expressed it the way the wealthy express most things, through careful exclusion. Nia was not invited to certain family dinners. Nia's name was not spoken in certain contexts. Nia was acknowledged when necessary and forgotten when possible, a guest in the extended fiction that the Kang family maintained for social consumption. For a long time, Nia had managed this by refusing to let it cost her anything visible. She attended the events she was invited to and didn't attend the ones she wasn't. She maintained her composure at family gatherings, where she was made to feel peripheral, and she came home and sometimes, in the bathroom with the door locked, she held onto the sink and took several long breaths. She didn't tell Taejun about those moments. She didn't know how to tell him without it sounding like an ultimatum, and she had never wanted to be a woman who issued ultimatums. That was, she had come to understand in the last few months, one of her most significant errors. She was 59 when she found out she was pregnant. The test was a mistake. She'd taken it almost as a formality because she was tired and her body felt strange, and she was old enough to be thinking about a different kind of biological conversation entirely. She sat on the edge of the bathtub and looked at the result for a very long time without moving. Her first coherent thought was not about Taejun. It was about her mother, Adaeze, who had died 4 years earlier and who would have had something extraordinary to say about this. Her second thought was about fear. Not shame, fear. The particular fear of a woman who has spent decades building a structure for her life and suddenly sees how fragile the foundation was. She was 60 years old by the time the Kang Foundation annual gala arrived. The pregnancy was not yet visible under her dress. She had not told anyone. She had been carrying this alone for 7 weeks, turning it over and over in her mind, trying to find the right moment, the right words, the right version of the conversation that wouldn't break something irreparable between them. She had decided tonight, after the gala. Private. Just the two of them. She had not anticipated Madame Seo. The drop of the champagne glass, that deliberate, controlled release, happened at 40 minutes past 9. Nia had been speaking quietly with Han Ji-sung, the Kang family's longtime legal advisor, when she heard the sound and turned. Madame Seo was looking at her. The expression on the older woman's face was not anger. It was something colder than anger. It was the expression of a decision that had already been made. "Remove her," Madame Seo said. The room changed texture. 300 people in formal wear holding their drinks, and the air went sharp and attentive the way it does when something real is about to happen. Han Ji-sung moved slightly. "Madame Seo, this is a Kang family event," Madame Seo said, still quiet, still controlled. "She is not Kang family." The two security men were already moving. Nia watched them come, and something inside her went very quiet and very clear, the way things sometimes do at the end of a long period of ambiguity. 20 years. She had given 20 years to this world, this man, this family that had never let her fully in, and Madame Seo was now going to have her escorted out of a room in front of 300 witnesses like she was nothing, like she had always been nothing. The security men stopped a few feet from her, waiting, she understood, for her to simply cooperate, to go quietly, to disappear the way she had been disappearing for 2 decades, in small increments, whenever it was convenient for the family for her not to exist. She looked at them. Then she turned. Across the ballroom, Kang Taejun stood with his back to her, deep in conversation with a group of men she recognized as political contacts. She could see the set of his shoulders, the slight angle of his head, the way he held his glass. She knew every version of his body language after 20 years. She could read him from across a crowded room, the way you learn to read someone when they are the most important person in your daily existence. She said his name once. Not loudly, but clearly. He turned, found her immediately, across the distance and the crowd and the silence that had fallen over the room. She held his gaze. She felt her hands, steady at her sides. She felt the child inside her that she had been carrying alone for 7 weeks, the impossible fact of it, the terrifying miracle of it. "I'm 60 years old, Taejun," she said. The words moved through the room. "I thought my chance for a miracle was gone forever." She did not look away from him. "But I'm pregnant." The glass in his hand hit the floor. Not dropped, not thrown. His fingers simply stopped working, the way a person's hands stop working when the world reorganizes itself around a single fact, and the crystal shattered on the marble. And Kang Taejun, the man who had not shown surprise in front of other people in possibly 20 years, stood completely still with blood running slowly from his palm where a shard had caught him. The ballroom did not breathe. Nia stood in the center of it, 60 years old, wearing a dark green dress that her daughter had picked out, and she did not move. She had been in rooms that didn't want her entire life. She was done disappearing from them. The blood on his palm was the first thing that made it real, not her words, not the silence that followed them, not the 300 people in that ballroom who had stopped breathing simultaneously. It was the blood, dark and immediate against his skin, spreading in a thin line from where the crystal had caught him. That Taejun stared at for the 3 seconds it took his mind to process what Nia had just said in front of everyone he had ever done business with, feared, or called family. His security detail moved toward him on instinct. He stopped them with one hand. Across the ballroom, Nia had not moved. She was standing exactly where she'd been standing when she said it, spine straight, chin level, hands at her sides. And she was watching him with an expression he had never seen on her face before. Not defiance, not desperation. Something past both of those things. The face of a woman who had made a decision and was now simply waiting to see what it cost her. Madame Seo spoke first. Taejun. His mother's voice was the same temperature it always was. This is not the place. You're right, he said. He did not look at her. He was still looking at Nia. It isn't. He crossed the ballroom. People moved out of his way without being asked. They always did. 30 years of building a reputation that preceded him into every room meant that his body moving through a crowd created its own current, a parting of bodies that happened automatically, unconsciously, like weather. He reached Nia and stopped. Up close, he could see what the distance had hidden, the slight tension around her jaw, the controlled steadiness of her breathing that he recognized because he had watched her sleep for 20 years. And he knew exactly what Nia looked like when she was working very hard to hold something together. Her eyes were dry. That cost her. He knew it cost her. How long? He said. Quiet. Between them, the ballroom noise around them suddenly irrelevant. 7 weeks. 7 weeks. He repeated it like he was learning a new language. You've known for 7 weeks. Yes. And you didn't tell me. She looked at him steadily. I'm telling you now. Something moved across his face that he couldn't entirely control. Not anger, or not only anger. Something with more layers to it. Something that had to do with the 7 weeks themselves, with the image of Nia alone in a bathroom somewhere, finding out something this enormous and deciding to carry it by herself. We need to leave, he said. Your mother just had security try to remove me from this room, Nia said. Not heated, factual. I think I'll stay where I am. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he turned to face the room. 300 people looked away at approximately the same speed. The specific, practiced lack of eye contact that powerful people deploy when they've witnessed something they weren't supposed to and are rapidly calculating what it means for them. Madame Seo had not looked away. She was standing 15 feet from them, perfectly still, with her champagne glass replaced in her hand. Someone had brought her a new one. And her expression was doing something complicated and controlled that Taejun had learned to read over 50 years of being her son. She was not panicking, she was recalibrating. That was in many ways more dangerous than panic. We will speak at home, Taejun said to the room in general, which meant to his mother specifically, in the way that family communication often worked in spaces like this, coded, layered, understood by everyone, and acknowledged by no one. Madame Seo inclined her head a fraction of an inch. The ride back to the house was 40 minutes of the most specific kind of silence Nia had ever sat inside. Taejun's driver kept his eyes forward. The partition was up. Outside, Seoul moved past the windows in its nighttime version, lit and anonymous and indifferent. Taejun had his injured hand wrapped in a handkerchief. He hadn't let anyone clean it properly at the venue, waving off the staff who'd approached with a first aid kit, with the kind of dismissal that said the hand was the least important thing happening to him right now. He sat turned slightly away from her, elbow on the door, watching the city. Nia watched him. She had spent 20 years learning how to read his silences. This one was not the cold processing silence he deployed in business situations, the silence that meant he was calculating. This was different, rougher at the edges, the silence of a man who had been caught completely off guard and was not accustomed to that feeling and did not know yet what to do with it. You should have told me immediately, he said, finally. I know. 7 weeks, Nia. I know. Why? Not a question exactly. More like a word he needed to put in the air between them. She turned to look at the window on her side. The city slid past. She thought about how to say something true without weaponizing it, which was harder than it sounded when you had 20 years of compressed things sitting in your chest. Because I didn't know what you would do, she said. and I needed to know what I was going to do first. He turned from the window. What does that mean? It means I'm 60 years old and I'm pregnant and I've lived in your house for 2 decades without a last name and your mother just tried to have me removed from a public event. She kept her voice even. It means I had some thinking to do before I put this in your hands. The car moved through an intersection. A traffic light somewhere turned green. You don't trust me, he said. I trust you with a lot of things. She finally looked at him. I've trusted you with 20 years of my life. I just don't always trust you to choose me when it's expensive to choose me. The words landed. She watched them land. She had not planned to say it that plainly. She had planned in all her imagined versions of this conversation to be more careful, more diplomatic. But Madame Seo's voice telling security to remove her was still fresh in her ears, and careful had gotten her 20 years of living in a house she had no legal claim to. Taejun said nothing for a long moment. That's fair, he said finally, which was not the response she had expected, and which, somehow, was worse than an argument would have been. The house was lit when they arrived. It was always lit. Taejun employed a staff of 8 who maintained the property whether anyone was home or not, a habit left over from his father's era that he'd never bothered to change. The housekeeper, Mrs. Park, appeared at the entrance and took one look at Taejun's hand and his expression and had a first aid kit produced within 90 seconds without being asked. He sat at the kitchen table while she cleaned and dressed the cut. Nia stood at the counter with a glass of water she wasn't drinking. Neither of them spoke while Mrs. Park worked, because certain kinds of conversations required a specific audience of 0. When Mrs. Park was done, she gathered her materials, looked between the two of them with the particular discretion of a woman who had worked in this house for 15 years and understood that discretion was the most valuable thing she offered, and left. Taejun looked at his bandaged hand. Is the pregnancy healthy? He asked. The question was so direct, so stripped of everything except the actual concern in it, that Nia felt something pull loose in her chest. So far, she said, I've had 2 appointments. Everything looks normal, which the doctor said was unusual, given my age. Not impossible, just unusual. Are you... He stopped. Tried again. How are you feeling? Tired, she said. Scared. She paused. I didn't think this was something that could still happen to me. I'd made a kind of peace with that, with the idea that Amara was the family I got to have. And then, she stopped. I was looking at her with an expression she didn't have a name for. It wasn't the face he wore for board meetings or confrontations or the 1,000 other situations that made up his public life. It was an older face, younger, somehow, at the same time. And then, he repeated softly, and then. The kitchen clock ticked. Somewhere in the house, a door closed quietly. I want to be at the next appointment, he said. Taejun. I want to be there, he said again. Not a negotiation, just a fact he was placing between them. She looked at him for a long moment. All right, she said. They did not resolve anything else that night. There was too much to resolve, and they were both too tired, and the kind of tiredness they were each carrying was the kind that sleep wouldn't touch. Nia went to bed at midnight and lay awake until nearly 3, listening to the sounds of the house she'd lived in for nearly 2 decades and trying to locate, somewhere in her body, a version of certainty about what happened next. She couldn't find it. Madame Seo arrived at 9 the following morning. She didn't call ahead. She never called ahead for the Taejun house. It was still, in her accounting of the world, a Kang family property, which meant it was her right to enter it, and the fact that Nia lived there had never adjusted that accounting in the older woman's mind. Nia was in the kitchen when she heard the front door. She knew the sound of Madame Seo's shoes on the entryway floor, a specific rhythm, unhurried and deliberate, the same way she knew the particular silence that happened when the woman entered a space and the staff recalibrated around her. She poured a second cup of tea, set it on the table across from her own, and waited. Madame Seo came into the kitchen, looked at the second cup, and sat down without commenting on it. They regarded each other across the table. My son is not here, Nia said. I know, I didn't come to see my son. Madame Seo picked up the tea, inspected it briefly, set it down without drinking it. I came to speak with you directly. All right, Nia said. What you did last night was reckless. What I did last night, Nia said carefully, was tell the man I have spent 20 years with that I am carrying his child. In a room full of our enemies. In a room full of your enemies, Nia said, I've never claimed them as mine. Something moved behind Madame Seo's eyes. Not anger, a kind of reluctant recalibration, the expression of someone adjusting their estimate of an opponent. You understand what this will do, Madame Seo said, to the family, to the perception. I understand what a 60-year-old woman carrying her partner's child might look like to people who have already decided she is an embarrassment, Nia said. Yes, I've thought about that. Then you understand why this cannot— Finish that sentence carefully, Nia said. Madame Seo stopped. The two women sat across from each other in a kitchen in Seoul at 9 in the morning, and the thing between them, 20 years of it, compressed and accumulated and never once spoken plainly, sat on the table between them like a third presence. I am not going to disappear, Nia said. I want to be very clear about that. I am not going to manage this quietly. I am not going to make this convenient for anyone. I am 60 years old, and I am going to have this child, and I am going to raise this child, and whether that happens with Taejun's name or without it, I will do it. Madame Seo's face did not change. And if I told you, the older woman said slowly, that I have arranged for Taejun to meet someone, a formal introduction, a woman from the Im family. This was planned months ago. Nia heard the words. She took a breath. Then I would say that Taejun is 58 years old and has been making his own decisions since before you approved of them. She kept her voice level. She was very proud of herself for keeping her voice level. And I would say that a man who just found out he's about to be a father has a slightly different set of priorities this morning than he did yesterday. The Im family connection would stabilize. I don't care about the Im family. Nia set down her cup. I have spent 20 years caring about this family. I have learned your language and your customs, and I have raised my daughter in this city, and I have built my business around the life I share with your son. I have been patient, and I have been quiet, and I have been— She stopped. I have been so quiet for so long. Her voice had almost broken on that last part. She felt it, and she pulled it back, but not before it happened. Madame Seo looked at her. Something in the older woman's expression did something complicated that Nia couldn't read. The Im family meeting is already scheduled, Madame Seo said finally, for next Friday. Then you'd better unschedule it, Nia said, or have the conversation with your son yourself and let him decide. Madame Seo stood. She picked up the tea she hadn't drunk, carried it to the sink, and poured it out with the precise movements of a woman who controlled even the small physical gestures of her life. At the kitchen door she stopped. You are not wrong, she said, without turning around, that you have been patient. A pause that lasted several seconds. I did not say I was unaware of it. And then she left. Nia sat in the empty kitchen and breathed. Taejun came home at noon. He found her in the study, working, or attempting to work, moving papers from one position to another with the concentrated focus of a person whose mind is not actually on the papers. My mother was here, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes. What did she say? Nia considered how to answer this. That she'd arranged an introduction for you with someone from the Im family. Taejun went very still. She told you that. She told me that. The stillness stretched out. Nia had learned to wait inside his stillnesses. She had spent years becoming fluent in the language of what Taejun didn't say out loud. I didn't know about an Im family meeting, he said. I know you didn't, she said. How do you know? Because you are many things, Taejun, and you have disappointed me in many ways, she said. But you have never been cruel. And introducing me to a potential replacement while I'm carrying your child would be cruel. He sat down heavily in the chair across from her desk. He put his elbows on his knees and his face in his unbandaged hand, and for a moment he looked like a man who was simply tired. Not powerful, not controlled, not feared. Just tired in the way that accumulates across decades. My mother has been arranging things for 40 years, he said into his hand. I stopped noticing. I know, Nia said. He looked up. That's not an excuse. I know that too. He held her gaze. What do you want, Nia? Not tonight, not in the last 7 weeks. What do you actually want? Tell me. She looked at him across the desk. 20 years. 20 years of dinners and crises and the ordinary texture of a life shared between two people. And he was asking her now, with this pregnancy between them, what she wanted. as if it should have required a crisis to ask. "I want my child to have a father," she said. "A real one. Present, accountable. Not a man who sends someone else when things get complicated." She paused. "And I have wanted, for a very long time, to stop being the family secret." He absorbed this. "You were never a secret to me," he said. "I know," she said. "I was a secret to everyone else. And you let that happen." The words sat between them. True words always had a weight to them that other words didn't. "Yes," he said, "I did." The week that followed was the most disorienting of Nia's adult life, and she had had some genuinely disorienting adult weeks. News of her announcement at the gala moved through Seoul's social and criminal networks with the speed of information in close, powerful communities, which was to say, immediately and comprehensively, and with significant embellishment. By the day after the gala, Han Ji-sung called to warn her that at least 4 separate parties were already asking questions about her background, her company's finances, and the timeline of her relationship with Taejun. Not journalists. The kind of parties who preferred information to remain out of the papers entirely, which meant they were considering their options. "Enemies," Nia said. "Opportunists," Han Ji-sung said, which was a distinction without a difference in this particular world. She told Taejun. He listened without interrupting, then made 3 phone calls in rapid succession in a language she no longer found difficult to understand, and afterward she could see in his shoulders the shift back into operational mode. The Kang organization's head, not the man who had sat with his face in his hand. It was useful, she was glad of it, and she felt, watching it, the specific loneliness of loving someone who has a whole other self they become when the world requires it. Amara arrived from Tokyo on Wednesday. Nia had called her daughter 2 days after the gala, after she'd slept, after she'd eaten, after she'd had 24 hours to feel something other than the adrenaline of standing in a ballroom telling 300 people she was pregnant. Amara had listened to her mother's careful, measured explanation of the situation, and then she'd said, "Mama, I'm getting on a plane," and hung up. She arrived at the house at 11 in the morning, dropped her bag in the entryway without breaking stride, came directly into the kitchen, and sat across from Nia at the same table where Madame Seo had sat 2 days earlier. She was 32 years old, Nia's daughter, with her mother's eyes and a directness that she'd gotten from nobody else. She'd grown up in Seoul, between 2 cultures, which had given her the particular fluency of someone who has never fully belonged to any room and therefore learned to read all of them. She looked at her mother for a long moment. "How are you actually doing?" she asked. And Nia, who had been holding everything carefully in place for 11 days, felt something behind her eyes go hot. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I'm scared. I don't know what this changes. I don't know what it's supposed to change. I'm 60 years old, Amara." "I know how old you are," Amara said, not unkindly. "I don't know if I can—" "Mama." Amara reached across the table and put her hand over her mother's. "You raised me mostly by yourself inside a Korean crime family without being a member of it. You built a company in a country where you didn't speak the language when you arrived. You are the most capable person I have ever met." She paused. "You can do this. That's not what you're actually scared of." Nia looked at her daughter. "What am I actually scared of?" "That he won't step up," Amara said plainly. "That you'll have this baby and he'll do exactly what he's done for 20 years, which is love you without ever making it count." The clock on the kitchen wall ticked. "Yes," Nia said. "That's a fair thing to be scared of," Amara said. "It doesn't mean it'll happen." On Thursday, Taejun came home from a meeting and found Amara in the living room. He stopped in the doorway. Amara looked up from her phone. They regarded each other with the particular complicated regard of 2 people who have spent decades in a family structure without quite knowing what they were to each other. "Amara," he said. "Taejun," she said. She'd never called him anything else, not dad, not uncle, not sir, just his name, on her terms. He came into the room, sat in the chair across from her. "Your mother told you everything," he said. "My mother tells me everything," she said. "She always has. That's what happens when someone's your main person." He absorbed that. "I know I haven't been," he started. "I'm not here to audit you," Amara said. "I'm here for my mother. What you do now is your decision." She put her phone face down on her knee and looked at him directly. "But I want you to understand something. My mother has given 20 years to this house, to this city, to this family that has never once given her its name. She has done it because she loves you, not because she needed you, because she chose you. She paused. She's 60 years old, and she's pregnant, and she stood in a ballroom and told the truth because your mother tried to have her removed. Do you understand what kind of courage that took? Taejun said nothing. You need to decide, Amara said, what kind of man you're going to be from here. Not what kind of organization head, not what your mother expects, what kind of man. She picked her phone back up. The conversation, she indicated, was over. Taejun sat in the chair for a moment longer. Then he got up and left the room. What neither Nia nor Amara knew on Thursday evening was what Kang Min-seok had found out. Taejun's younger brother had been working quietly on the edges of the family's internal politics for years. The role of the younger sibling in a structure like the Kang organization was necessarily oblique, adjacent to power without holding it, useful precisely because people underestimated the second son. Min-seok was 44, sharper than he let on, and had spent the last 3 days quietly pulling threads. He called Taejun at 10 on Thursday night. What he said lasted 6 minutes. When the call ended, Taejun sat in his office for a very long time without moving. Then he stood up, put on his jacket, and went to find Han Ji-sung. It was midnight when he came back to the house. Nia was still awake. She was usually still awake at midnight now. The pregnancy was doing something to her sleep architecture that she hadn't anticipated, and she heard him come in. She heard him stop outside the bedroom door, and she heard the quality of his stillness, and she got out of bed. She opened the door. He was standing in the hallway, jacket still on. He looked at her with an expression that meant something significant had shifted. Min-seok found something, he said. What? The Im family introduction. He paused. It was not my mother's idea. Nia looked at him. Whose idea was it? It was a trade, he said. A favor called in by Chairman Park. The Im family has significant debt to our organization. In exchange for clearing part of it, Chairman Park suggested to my mother that an Im family marriage would stabilize certain financial relationships. He held her gaze. My mother thought she was making a strategic decision for the family. She didn't know she was being managed. Nia processed this. Someone was engineering a marriage to create a financial structure that would legitimize a set of transactions that are currently illegal, he said. Using my mother. Using our family. Using the fact that you and I have never. He stopped. Using the fact that I never made it official. The hallway of the house they had shared for 20 years stretched between them. Someone has been watching us for a long time, she said. Yes. And they knew that the easiest way to move you was through your mother and through me. Yes. She absorbed this. The pregnancy shifted in her body, not painfully, just present, that new constant awareness. She put her hand flat against her stomach, a gesture she'd started doing without deciding to, and she watched Taejun watch her do it. What are you going to do? She asked. He took a breath, let it out slowly. Min-seok says there are 3 other families involved. He says the plan has been in place for at least 2 years. And he says, he stopped again, something in his expression that she recognized as the specific difficulty of a man who does not easily say certain things. He says that the only reason it took them this long to move is because they thought you would leave. They believed for 2 years that you would eventually decide the situation was untenable and go. That your presence here was temporary. Nia looked at him. They bet against me staying, she said. Yes. And now they know I'm not going anywhere. Now they know, he said, that you are carrying a Kang heir, which changes the entire calculation, which means they are going to move faster and less carefully than they planned. His eyes were direct on hers. Nia, I need you to understand what I'm saying. It's not just the family politics now. There are people who have a financial interest in this family taking a specific direction, and you and this child are in the way of that direction. The house was quiet around them. Seoul was somewhere outside, enormous and indifferent. She understood what he was saying. She understood that a week ago, her biggest problem had been an aging matriarch's disapproval, and that something in the world had shifted, in a room she hadn't known existed, making her and the child she was carrying into a liability that someone, somewhere, needed to manage. Then we handle it, she said. Nia, Taejun. She met his eyes. I stood in a ballroom and told 300 people I was pregnant. I am past the point of managing things quietly. She took a breath. Tell me what we need to do. He looked at her for a long moment. And in the hallway of a house in Seoul at midnight, something between them finally, formally, stopped being a question. The meeting with Han Ji-sung happened at 6 in the morning, not at his office. At a private room above a restaurant in Mapo that the Kang organization had used for sensitive conversations for 15 years, a room with no windows facing the street, a door that locked from the inside, and a proprietor who had learned long ago that the most valuable thing he could offer certain clients was absolute amnesia about what happened on his second floor. Nia had insisted on being there. Taejun had not argued. That itself told her something, that the calculus between them had shifted overnight, that whatever he'd been protecting her from by keeping her at the margins of his operational world, he understood now that the margins were no longer safe either. Han Ji-sung was already seated when they arrived. I was 67 years old, a small man with the kind of stillness that came from decades of sitting in rooms where the wrong word ended careers or worse. He had been the Kang family's legal architect since before Taejun took over. He knew where every body was buried, sometimes literally, and he had survived multiple regime changes within the organization by being simultaneously indispensable and invisible. He looked at Nia when she walked in, and something in his expression shifted. Not surprise. Recognition of a kind, the look of a man reassessing a situation he thought he'd already fully mapped. You should have brought her in years ago, he said to Taejun. I know, Taejun said. He sat. Nia sat beside him. Tell her what you told me. Han Ji-sung spread a set of documents across the table. Physical documents. He distrusted digital files for conversations like this, another habit left over from an earlier era that had kept him alive and uncomplicated. Chairman Park Sung-wan, he said, has been building a financial structure for 3 years designed to absorb a significant portion of the Kang organization's legitimate holdings. Not the criminal network, the surface businesses, the hotels, the construction subsidiaries, the cultural foundation, the parts that exist in the sunlight. He tapped a document. The vehicle for this absorption is a series of interlocking debt instruments held by 4 families, including the Im family. If these instruments are called simultaneously, the Kang organization's surface entities face a liquidity crisis significant enough to require external rescue. Nia looked at the document. Numbers, names, corporate structures rendered in the dry language of financial engineering. And the rescue comes from Park, she said. The rescue comes from a consortium Park controls, Han Ji-sung said. At which point the surface businesses are no longer Kang-controlled. At which point the criminal network loses its laundering infrastructure. At which point the whole thing collapses from the outside in, Taejun said. He said it like he'd been saying it all night, like the words had worn a groove. The Im family marriage was meant to consolidate the debt instruments under a single family structure, Han Ji-sung continued. A Kang-Im marriage would have created enough financial entanglement to make the consortium's move look like a family dispute rather than a hostile takeover, harder to fight, harder to expose. How long have you known about this? Nia asked. Han Ji-sung looked at her. I suspected something 18 months ago. I didn't have documentation until Min Seok started pulling threads this week. Why didn't you bring it to Taejun 18 months ago? A pause. Brief, but real. Because 18 months ago, I didn't know who inside the organization might be facilitating it, he said, and I needed to be certain before I brought it to anyone. Nia looked at him steadily. Are you certain now? About Park and the consortium, yes. He aligned the documents carefully. About everything else. Not entirely. Taejun heard the qualifier. What does that mean? Han Ji-sung was quiet for a moment in the specific way of a man choosing the exact weight of his next words. The debt instruments, he said. Someone within the Kang organization's financial structure had to facilitate their creation. Park couldn't have built this from the outside alone. There are internal records, transfers, authorizations that should have generated flags and didn't. He paused. Someone made sure they didn't. The room was very quiet. You're saying there's someone inside, Taejun said. I'm saying the architecture required inside access, Han Ji-sung said carefully. I'm not yet saying who. Taejun's jaw tightened. Nia watched him absorb this, watched the specific quality of stillness that came over him when something genuinely threatened him, the way all the surface effect drained away, and what remained was something older and colder. "Find out," he said. "I'm working on it," Han Ji-sung said. "But carefully. If whoever it is knows we're looking, I understand the parameters," Taejun said. "Find out." They left the restaurant at 8:30. The city was fully awake by then, Seoul's morning rush indifferent to the conversation that had just happened above a restaurant in Mapo. Nia sat in the car and watched the streets and thought about inside access and debt instruments and the word carefully and what it meant that Han Ji-sung had spent 18 months being careful while the architecture went up around them. She thought about Madame Seo. She thought about it carefully, in the way you turn over something fragile that you don't want to break before you understand what it is. Taejun was watching her. "Say it," he said. "I'm not saying anything yet," she said. "Nia." "I need more information before I say it," she said. "And so do you." He held her gaze. He knew her well enough to know she wasn't deflecting. She was being precise. He turned back to the window. They rode the rest of the way in silence. Amara was in the kitchen when they got back. She'd made breakfast, eggs, toast, the kind of practical domestic action that Nia recognized as her daughter's way of managing anxiety. The need to be doing something concrete when everything else felt uncontrollable. She looked at her mother's face and asked no questions. She put a plate in front of Nia and one in front of Taejun and poured coffee and sat across from them. "Eat," she said. "Whatever it is, you need to eat first." Nia picked up a fork. Her appetite had been unpredictable for weeks. Some mornings ravenous, some mornings the smell of food sent her to the bathroom. But this morning her body seemed to understand that it needed fuel regardless of what her mind was doing. Taejun did not eat. He sat with the coffee in both hands and stared at the table with the specific unfocused stare of a man doing rapid internal calculations. "Taejun," Amara said, "eat something." He looked up at her. The faint surprise on his face, at being instructed by this woman who had grown up in his house without ever being his daughter, was almost humanizing. He picked up his fork. They ate. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past. Mrs. Park could be heard somewhere in the back of the house, moving with her usual efficiency. Ordinary. All of it ordinary, layered over something that wasn't ordinary at all. At 10 o'clock, Min Seok arrived. He came in through the side entrance. He had a key, one of 3 copies, a fact Nia had known for years and never commented on, and came directly to the study where Taejun had installed himself with Han Ji-sung's documents spread across the desk. Nia was in the chair by the window. Min Seok clocked her presence, adjusted something in his posture the way he always did around her, a slight increase in guardedness that she'd never been entirely sure was about her specifically or about the situation she represented, and then turned to his brother. "I have a name," he said. Taejun looked up. "Who?" Min Seok glanced at Nia. "She stays," Taejun said. A beat. Min Seok pulled a chair from against the wall, set it in front of the desk, and sat. "The internal access," he said. "The authorizations on the debt instruments. I traced the signature chain back through 4 shell structures." He paused. "The original authorization signature belongs to Kang Taejun." The room did not change. The light from the window was the same. The papers on the desk did not move. Taejun did not react visibly for approximately 5 seconds. "Taejun," he said. Flat. "Yes." Nia looked between them. She knew the name. Kang Taejun was 51 years old, a cousin, the son of Taejun's father's younger brother, who had died when Taejun was 12, and who had left him to be raised, more or less, within the Kang household. He held a senior position in the organization's financial operations. He'd been there for over 20 years. He had also, Nia had always quietly noted, never liked her. Not with the open hostility of Madame Seo's disapproval, something more careful than that. The specific dislike of a man who had decided she was a foreign body in a system he considered his to protect. "You're certain," Taejun said. "I'm certain about the signatures," Min Seok said. "I'm certain about the shell structure. I can't tell you why he did it without asking him." "How long?" "The first authorization is dated 26 months ago." Taejun was quiet. The quality of his silence had changed. Nia recognized this particular frequency. She'd heard it very rarely, less than a handful of times in 2 decades, and it always preceded something significant and irreversible. "He's been inside Park's structure for over 2 years," Taejun said. Yes. While sitting in my financial operations. Yes. Another silence. Does he know you found this? Taejun asked. I was careful, Min Seok said. But Do-hyun is not stupid. If he's watching for anyone to start pulling threads, and someone in his position would be watching, he may already suspect something is moving. Taejun stood up from the desk. He moved to the window, stood with his back to the room, looking out at the garden. Nia watched him. She could see the tension in the set of his shoulders. Not rage, exactly. Something more controlled than rage. The specific feeling of a man recalculating 26 months of memory, recontextualizing every meeting and decision and conversation he'd had with someone he'd trusted. Leave us, Taejun said. Min Seok stood. He looked at Nia briefly, not hostilely, just acknowledging, and then left. The door closed behind him. Taejun stayed at the window. Nia waited. He came to every Christmas dinner, Taejun said finally. For 20 years. He was at my father's funeral. I put him in financial operations because I trusted him with the most sensitive part of the organization's infrastructure. He stopped. He's been watching me build this for over 2 decades, and he decided to sell it to Park. You don't know his reasons yet, Nia said. His reasons are not what's making this difficult. What's making it difficult? He turned from the window. That I didn't see it. That someone was inside my house. Not this house, but the organization, which is the house I built. For 2 years. And I did not see it. She held his gaze. You're not infallible. In my position, he said, infallibility is the performance that keeps people safe, including you. Including... He stopped. His eyes moved briefly to her midsection, to the place where the pregnancy was not yet visible. The moment that performance breaks, it's already broken, she said, not cruelly. It broke when I stood up in that ballroom. That's done. You're not managing perceptions anymore, Taejun. You're managing reality. Something in him absorbed that. What do you want to do about Do-hyun? She asked. He looked at her. That's not your concern. Taejun, her voice was even. I am carrying a Kang child in a house that is apparently under threat from inside the organization. Everything that concerns this family concerns me now. You said you wanted me to stop being a secret. This is what not being a secret looks like. He was quiet for a long moment. Do-hyun can't know we've found him, he said finally. Not yet. Not until we understand the full scope of what he's given Park. If we move on him before we know what information is already out. He burns the rest on his way out, she said. I understand. He looked at her with something that was not quite surprise, something more like recognition. Yes. So we wait. We watch, he said. There's a difference. The next 4 days were the strangest of Nia's life in Seoul, which was a significant statement given the 2 decades of strange that preceded them. She moved through the house with the particular awareness of someone who knows they are inside a situation that is developing faster than they can fully track. She went to her 3rd prenatal appointment. Taejun came, as he'd said he would, sitting in the clinic waiting room in a black coat, looking somewhat like a man who had wandered into the wrong building but was committed to staying anyway. He held her hand during the ultrasound without being asked. Neither of them said much. The heartbeat on the monitor was small and rapid and entirely real. She watched Taejun's face while he listened to it. Whatever was happening in the organization, whatever Do-hyun had done, and Park was planning, and the whole dark machinery of it. For the 3 minutes they listened to that heartbeat, none of it was in the room. It came back in the car. On the 3rd day, Han Ji-sung called. Nia was alone in the study when the call came. Taejun was at the organization, not confronting Do-hyun, she knew, but maintaining the performance of normalcy that was currently their best intelligence tool. She answered because Han Ji-sung had been given her number specifically for situations when Taejun wasn't immediately reachable. I need you to come to my office, he said. Alone. She noticed the alone. Why alone? A pause that lasted 1 second too long. Because what I found changes the situation in a way that, I need you to hear it first, he said. I need your judgment on how to bring it to Taejun. She was in the car 12 minutes later. Han Ji-sung's office was in a building in Gangnam that presented itself as an unremarkable legal firm and contained, in its back rooms, 20 years of Kang family documentation that would be of extraordinary interest to multiple government agencies. He met her at the elevator and walked her to a conference room she hadn't been in before. Smaller, further from the windows. He closed the door. He did not sit. I found the rest of the thread, he said. The part Min Seok didn't reach. Tell me. He looked at her with the expression of a man about to do something that will cost him. Do-hyun did not go to Park independently, he said. 2 years ago, before the first authorization, there was a meeting, a preliminary meeting, to discuss whether a consortium approach was viable and who inside the organization might facilitate it. He paused. That meeting was arranged by someone who provided Park with the initial intelligence about the organization's surface business vulnerabilities. Nia kept her face still. Who arranged the meeting? Han Ji-sung set a document on the table. A single page. A communication record. Internal, dated 28 months ago, before the first of Do-hyun's authorizations. She looked at it. She read the name at the bottom. The room did not tilt. Her hands did not shake. She was aware of both of these things, the stillness of her own body, with the detached precision that sometimes came in moments of significant shock. When the mind disconnects briefly from the physical in order to process something it does not know how to hold. The name at the bottom of the page was Madame Seo Hwayeon. She didn't know what Park intended to do with the information, Han Ji-sung said. His voice was careful, not gentle. He was not a man who did gentle. I want to be precise about that. She was not trying to destroy the organization. She was... He stopped, chosen his words. She was trying to create leverage. She gave Park the vulnerability assessment because she believed it would remain theoretical, a negotiating tool, something she could use to pressure Taejun into the Im family marriage without having to explain her reasons. Nia stood very still. She didn't know Park would actually build the structure, Han Ji-sung continued. She didn't know Do-hyun would be recruited. She gave Park a map of the organization's weaknesses because she wanted her son to make a different choice about his personal life, and she believed she could control how that information was used. A pause. She was wrong. Nia thought about the kitchen, the dropped champagne glass, the morning visit with the second cup of tea. I did not say I was unaware of it, the older woman had said, in that doorway, about Nia's patience. She thought about what it meant that Madame Seo had handed someone a weapon aimed at her own son's empire because she could not find another way to make him do what she wanted. She thought about what it meant that the weapon had been intended, at least in part, against Nia herself. She handed Park the information that started all of this, Nia said, because she wanted to force the Im family arrangement. Because she wanted Taejun to make a formal marriage, Han Ji-sung said. To anyone. The Im family was Park's suggestion. That part was not hers. She wanted the leverage. Park chose the direction. Nia sat down. She hadn't planned to. Her legs made the decision without consulting her. She sat in the chair and put both hands flat on the table and breathed. Taejun's mother had not set out to destroy the organization. She had set out to control her son's romantic life through a back channel, using a level of ruthlessness that was, when Nia thought about it, completely consistent with everything she knew about Madame Seo Hwayeon. A woman who had spent 40 years believing that the correct application of pressure at the correct point was the same thing as love. And Park had taken her map and built a maze. And Do-hyun, who had his own reasons, which they still didn't fully understand, had found a door in the maze and walked through it. And Nia was sitting in a conference room in Gangnam, 11 weeks pregnant, with the knowledge that the matriarch who had spent 20 years making her feel like an outsider had inadvertently lit the fuse on something that could bring down everything. Does Taejun know this part? She asked. No, Han Ji-sung said. You are the first person I've told. Why me? He was quiet for a moment. Because I have known Taejun for 30 years, he said, and I know what he will do when he finds out his mother's involvement. I know the specific way this will break something in him that does not break easily. He looked at her directly. And I have believed for some years, that you are the person best positioned to hold him together when it does. Nia looked at the document, the name, the date. 28 months ago. You're asking me to be the one to tell him, she said. I'm asking you to be present when he finds out, Han Ji-sung said. Those are different things. But yes. She was quiet for a long time. Outside the building, Seoul went about its enormous and different business. Somewhere in a clinic in Gangnam, her prenatal records were filed under her name. Somewhere in this city, Kang Taejun was sitting at a desk in the organization's financial offices, watching for signs that someone was looking for him. Somewhere, Chairman Park Sung-won was monitoring the progress of a 3-year plan that had just been unexpectedly complicated by a 60-year-old woman standing up in a ballroom. And Madame Seo Hwayeon was, where? In her apartment in Apgujeong, perhaps, drinking tea, reading. Living inside the fiction that the thing she had done 28 months ago was a controlled action with manageable consequences. All right, Nia said. She picked up her phone. She called Taejun. He answered on the second ring. I need you to come to Han Ji-sung's office, she said. Now, don't bring anyone. A pause. What's happened? Come, she said. I'll explain when you get here. She set the phone down. She looked at Han Ji-sung. She looked at the document with Madame Seo's name on it. She thought about the morning in the kitchen, the second cup of tea, the carefully poured out cup at the sink. I did not say I was unaware of it. The admission that had seemed, in the moment, like the first small crack in 20 years of the older woman's wall. It had been something else entirely. The guilt of someone who knew, in the privacy of her own accounting, that she had started something she could not stop. Taejun arrived in 19 minutes. He came through the door already reading the room. His eyes moved to Nia first, then Han Ji-sung, then the document on the table, then back to Nia. A complete read in under 2 seconds. His face gave nothing away. It never did at first. Sit down, Nia said. He looked at her. He heard something in her voice that made him, without comment, pull out a chair and sit. Han Ji-sung explained. Carefully, precisely, in the same measured language he'd used with Nia, making the same distinctions. What Madame Seo had intended versus what she'd set in motion. The difference between the map and the maze. Taejun listened without interrupting. His hands were flat on the table, a posture Nia recognized as the physical expression of maximum containment. Everything held down, nothing permitted to surface. When Han Ji-sung finished, the room was very quiet. Taejun looked at the document. He read the name. He read the date. He did not move for a long time. Then he stood up. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. He looked at Nia. Don't, she said. He looked at her. Don't go to her right now, she said. Not like this. Nia, you are not in a state to have that conversation, she said. And if you go to her right now in this state, you will say things that cannot be unsaid, and you will lose every advantage we have because she will know we have it. He stood there. She could see what it was costing him, the specific visible cost of a man who wants to do one thing and knows he cannot. She's my mother, he said. Not an excuse, just a fact he was trying to locate himself inside. I know, Nia said. She gave Park the information that could bring down everything I built. I know. Because she wanted me to marry someone else. The words came out ground down, stripped of every layer. Because she wanted you gone. Nia absorbed this. She let it sit. Yes, she said. He put one hand on the back of the chair. The knuckles went white briefly and then released. What do we do? He said. And Nia looked at the man she had loved for 20 years, the most feared man in Seoul, standing in a conference room with his hand on a chair, having just found out that the structure of everything he'd built was threatened from the inside by his own blood. And she thought about her mother, Adaeze, who had taught her that dignity was more valuable than wealth. And she thought about the child growing inside her who was going to come into a world that was messier and more complicated than any of them had planned. We start over, she said. Not the organization, not us. We start the strategy over, from a position of knowing what we actually know, instead of what we thought we knew. He looked at her for a long moment. Park moves in 9 days, Han Ji-sung said from across the table. Based on the debt instrument structure, the call window opens on the 14th. If we haven't disrupted the consortium by then, I know the timeline, Taejun said. He did not look away from Nia. 9 days. 9 days, she said. Outside, the city continued. A bus went past on the street below. Someone laughed in another office, a burst of sound completely disconnected from the room they were in. 9 days to dismantle a 3-year plan built on the back of a mother's desperation and a cousin's betrayal, with a mole still sitting inside the organization's financial operations and a consortium waiting to call instruments that could hollow out everything the Kang name controlled in the light. Taejun pulled out his chair and sat back down. He spread the documents across the table. And the woman who had spent 20 years being careful about what she asked for looked at the man who had spent 20 years being careful about what he gave, and they both understood at the same moment that careful was finished. 9 days. Taejun wrote the number on a piece of paper, set it at the top of the document spread across Han Ji-sung's conference table, and did not look at it again. He didn't need to. It had already installed itself somewhere behind his sternum, a countdown he could feel against his ribs every time he breathed. They worked through the night, not the three of them. Han Ji-sung made calls, pulled in 2 associates he trusted with the granular financial work, men who had been inside the Kang organization's legal architecture long enough to move through it without leaving traces. Nia sat at the table and read documents until her eyes burned, until the corporate structures and debt instruments and shell company names blurred into a single incomprehensible shape. And then she blinked, refocused, and kept reading. Taejun moved. He was not a man who processed things sitting still. He paced the length of the conference room, made calls in a voice too low to hear clearly, came back to the table to look at specific pages, paced again. His jacket was over the back of a chair. His tie was gone. She hadn't seen him remove it. The bandage on his palm from the gala had been replaced with a smaller one, and he kept flexing that hand without seeming to notice he was doing it. At 2 in the morning, one of Han Ji-sung's associates found the 4th member of Park's consortium. Not a family, a politician. A sitting member of the National Assembly whose relationship to Park Sung-won was documented through 4 degrees of corporate separation and a pattern of votes on financial regulation legislation that, once you knew what you were looking for, read like a ledger of favors exchanged. Han Ji-sung looked at the name for a long moment. Assemblyman Choi, he said. You know him, Taejun said. It wasn't a question. I know his weaknesses, Han Ji-sung said, which was a different kind of knowing and more useful. Can you move on him before Park does? I can, Han Ji-sung said, but it costs something. What? Reciprocity, Han Ji-sung said. He'll want something in exchange for pulling out of the consortium, something we give him now and he calls in later. Acceptable, Taejun said. Nia looked up from the documents she was reading. What does reciprocity look like in this context? Han Ji-sung met her gaze. Nothing violent, he said, which was, she noted, an answer to a question she hadn't quite asked, but that she appreciated nonetheless. Political cover, Taejun said. Support on something he needs. Campaign financing. It's transactional. We've done it before. All right, she said. She went back to the documents. At 4 in the morning, Taejun brought her a cup of coffee from the machine down the hall. He set it in front of her without comment. She drank it without looking up from the page she was reading. Go sleep, he said quietly. No. Nia, I'm reading the M family's debt instrument structure, she said. I want to understand exactly what's been pledged and what can be unwound before the call window opens. She turned a page. Go sleep yourself. He stood there a moment longer. Then he pulled out the chair next to her and sat down and picked up a document from the pile. They worked side by side until the windows started to gray with morning. Day 1 of 9. The decision about Do-hyun was the hardest. He was still in the organization, still sitting at his desk in the financial operations office, still processing transactions, still, as far as anyone in the organization knew, a trusted senior figure in the Kang Empire's infrastructure. He had to remain there. The moment he knew they'd found him, anything he hadn't already passed to Park would go immediately. Every leverage point they might use against the consortium had to be moved before Do-hyun could close the door on it. This meant Taejun had to look at him. Not immediately, but on the second day there was a routine operations meeting that Do-hyun would normally attend, and Taejun's absence would be noted, and Do-hyun was precisely the kind of man who noticed things. Taejun came home at midnight on day 1 and stood in the shower for 15 minutes and then came to find Nia, who was in bed but not sleeping, her back against the headboard with a lamp on, because she hadn't been sleeping well for weeks, and tonight was not going to be different. He sat on the edge of the bed. He looked at his hands. Tomorrow, I have to sit across a table from him, he said. She didn't ask who. I know, she said, and act like I don't know. Yes. He turned his hands over. The cut from the gala was healing, a thin dark line across his palm that would leave a faint scar, probably. I've been in rooms with people who wanted me dead, he said. I've negotiated across from men who were planning to have me killed the following week. I've done that without flinching, he paused. This is different. Because it's personal, she said. Because it's 20 years, he said. He's been in my organization for 20 years, and I put him there because I trusted him, and he stopped. His jaw tightened. I want to drag him out of that building by his collar. I know. I'm not going to. I know that too. He looked at her. How are you this calm? She thought about it. I'm not calm, she said. I'm just carrying too many things at once for any individual one of them to take over. She paused. And I've been managing things that felt unmanageable for a long time. This is larger, but the skill is the same. He was quiet. My mother, he said. What about her? I keep starting that sentence and not knowing how to finish it. Nia looked at him. This man she had spent 20 years with, who could walk into a room full of armed adversaries without his heart rate changing, sitting on the edge of their bed, unable to finish a sentence about his mother. She made a decision, Nia said carefully. A bad one. For reasons that were not entirely wrong from where she was standing. She wanted to protect the dynasty. She wanted you to build something permanent. She used a tool she thought she could control, and she was wrong about being able to control it. She paused. None of that is absolution. But it's not the same as betrayal, not the way Do-hyun is betrayal. She gave them the map, he said. Yes, she did. Nia met his eyes. And we'll deal with that, after. He looked at her for a long time. I don't know who I am, he said quietly. If the two people I'm supposed to be able to trust absolutely are the two people who… He stopped again. Nia moved the document she'd had on her lap and set it aside. She put her hand over his, on the scar from the gala. You're the man who sat in that clinic and listened to his daughter's heartbeat, she said. Start there. Day 2, the operations meeting. Nia didn't see it. She knew it was happening at 10 in the morning, and she tracked the hour with the specific awareness of someone waiting for news from somewhere they can't be. And at 11:15, Taejun texted her a single word, done, and she let out a breath she'd been holding for approximately 73 minutes. He came home at 7 that evening. He looked like a man who had spent 8 hours being something he wasn't. A particular exhaustion that came not from physical effort, but from sustained performance. He sat down at the kitchen table, and Amara, who had become the household's unofficial caretaker in the way that capable people naturally fill the role, when a crisis makes it necessary, put food in front of him without being asked. How was it? Nia asked. He knows something is moving, Taejun said. He doesn't know we have him specifically, but he's careful. He was extra careful today, watching the room. Did he look at you? Several times. He ate, set the fork down, picked it up again. I looked back each time. I gave him nothing. Good, Nia said. It took everything I had, he said. Not complaining, just accurate. Amara sat across from him. She looked at Taejun with an expression that Nia recognized. The specific assessing look her daughter had inherited directly from her. The look that measured a person for what they actually were rather than what they presented. You need to sleep, Amara said. Actually sleep, not 2 hours. I can't. 6 hours, Amara said. Or you'll be useless in the meeting tomorrow, and useless is more dangerous than tired. Taejun looked at her. She's right, Nia said. He looked between them. 2 women, across a kitchen table, entirely unified. All right, he said. Day 3 brought Min Seok with news about the Im family. The Im family patriarch, Im Chang-soo, 72 years old, a man who had built his fortune in shipping and spent the last decade converting it into social respectability, had not known the full scope of Park's plan. This was Min Seok's assessment after 2 days of careful, indirect contact through intermediaries. He knew about the debt instruments, Min Seok said. He understood that a Kang Im marriage would consolidate something financial. I didn't know it was the first step in a hostile takeover. Min Seok spread his hands. He thought it was a straightforward alliance. Kang organization's protection and reach. I'm family's legitimate capital. Standard arrangement. Park kept him in the dark about the endgame, Taejun said. Park kept everyone in the dark about the endgame, Min Seok said. That's how Park operates. He builds structures where each individual actor believes they're making a reasonable decision and none of them can see the shape of what they're all building together. Nia thought about Madame Seo. A reasonable decision, leverage, a tool she thought she could control. Can Im Chang-soo be brought out of the consortium, she asked. Min Seok looked at her. Possibly. If he understands that what he agreed to is not what he thought he agreed to. A pause. That conversation would need to come from someone credible, someone he can't dismiss. Taejun, Nia said. Not Taejun, Min Seok said. Taejun coming to Im Chang-soo looks like a power move. It looks like pressure. He paused. It needs to be someone Im Chang-soo would accept information from without feeling threatened. The room was quiet. Nia looked at the table. She thought about what she was. A 60-year-old woman, not Korean, not part of the formal organizational structure, not someone Im Chang-soo would have any reason to fear, also not someone he had any reason to listen to. Who does he respect, she asked. His daughter, Min Seok said. Im Soyeon. She runs the family's international operations. She's 44, educated abroad, pragmatic. She's been quietly skeptical of the Park relationship for some time, from what I understand. Can you get me a meeting with her? Nia asked. Both brothers looked at her. You? Taejun said. She runs international operations, Nia said. I run an international textile business. We have a meeting about a potential supply chain partnership. It's not unusual. She met his eyes. And during that meeting, I explained to her what her family has been built into, and I let her decide what to do with that information. Taejun was quiet. It's not safe, he said. It's not particularly dangerous either, she said. I'm not threatening her. I'm giving her information that it is very much in her family's interest to have. If she goes back to Park, then we're no worse than we were before, Nia said. We still have Do-hyun, we still have the documentation, we still have Assemblyman Choi moving through Han Ji-sung. Losing him from the equation makes Park's consortium weaker. It doesn't dismantle ours. Taejun looked at Min Seok. Min Seok looked at Nia. She's right about the logic, he said. Set up the meeting, Nia said. The meeting with Im Soyeon happened on day 5 at a hotel restaurant in Yeongdeung-po that was neutral enough ground for both of them and public enough that it couldn't be misread. Nia arrived first. She sat at the table that had been reserved and ordered tea and settled herself in the specific way she'd learned to settle herself before difficult conversations. Spine straight, hands visible on the table, breathing slow and even. Im Soyeon arrived 4 minutes after the scheduled time. She was precisely as Min Seok had described, a composed, sharply dressed woman with the particular confidence of someone who had spent her career operating between cultures and had stopped apologizing for any of them. She looked at Nia with an expression that was professionally neutral and somewhat curious. They went through the formalities of the pretextual meeting, a few minutes of supply chain conversation that both of them understood was the frame rather than the painting. Then Nia set her teacup down. I want to tell you something, she said, and I want you to hear it completely before you respond. Im Soyeon looked at her. All right, Nia told her. Clearly, without embellishment, without the organizational framing that would make it sound like a threat. She laid out what Park had built, and what the Im family's debt instruments were actually part of, and what would happen to Im Chang-soo's carefully constructed legitimacy when the consortium's endgame became public. Im Soyeon did not interrupt. She listened with her hands flat on the table and her face doing the specific controlled nothing of a person who is receiving significant information and refusing to process it visibly. When Nia finished, she was quiet for a moment. You're telling me my father was used, she said. Your father made an agreement with someone who told him half the truth, Nia said. Yes. And you're telling me this because if the instruments are called on day 9 and this becomes public, your family is inside Park's structure, Nia said. And everything your father spent 40 years building looks like it was part of a criminal financial operation. She paused. Which is not what he intended, but intention doesn't appear in a financial investigation. Im Soyeon looked at her tea. What do you want from me? She said. I want you to talk to your father, Nia said. That's all. What he decides to do is his business. Im Soyeon was quiet for a long moment. You're carrying Kang Taejun's child, she said. Not unkindly, just a fact she was placing in the room. Yes, Nia said. And you're the one he sent to have this meeting. I'm the one who asked to have this meeting, Nia said. There's a difference. Something in Im Soyeon's expression shifted slightly. A recalibration, Nia thought, of what she'd expected from this encounter. "I'll talk to my father," she said. Day 6 brought the confrontation with Do-hyun. Not planned. Taejun had not planned to move on Do-hyun until day 8, preserving as much time as possible to get the consortium pieces in place first. But day 6 arrived with Min Seok calling at 6 in the morning with 3 words: "He's running, now." Something had tipped Do-hyun. They never found out exactly what. A shifted document in the financial records, an overheard conversation, the particular sixth sense of a man who has been working a long-term deception and knows when the air changes. Whatever it was, Do-hyun had come into the financial operations office at 5:30 in the morning, accessed 3 specific files, and walked out carrying a bag he'd brought from home. Taejun was in the car before the call ended. Nia found out 40 minutes later when Taejun's head of security, a man named Jong, who spoke to her in the clipped professional manner of someone who had been instructed to keep her informed, called to tell her that the situation was active and that she should remain at the house. She remained at the house. She sat in the study with her hands in her lap and the phone on the desk in front of her, and she breathed, slowly and deliberately, because there was nothing else she could do, and losing her composure was not a luxury she had available. Amara came in and sat with her. Neither of them spoke much. At 8:47, Taejun called. "We have him," he said. His voice was tight, not with anger, with the specific strain of someone who had been moving at full speed for 2 hours. "He's at the organization's building in Seongdong. He didn't get out." "Is he?" "He's fine," Taejun said. "Nobody hurt him." "And the files he took?" A pause. "We're working on that." "Taejun?" "I'll be back by noon," he said. "Don't leave the house." "I wasn't planning to." "Good." Another pause. She could hear something in the background. Voices, movement, the organized sound of multiple people in a space managing something with controlled urgency. "Naya, I'm here. I need you to be okay." "I'm okay," she said. "Go." He was back at 1:30. Not noon. He came in through the front door looking like a man who had aged 4 years in a morning. The specific deterioration of sustained adrenaline followed by its absence. The body's crash after the system stood down. He sat in the kitchen, and Amara put coffee in front of him without being asked, and Nia sat across from him and waited. "The files he took," Taejun said. "He accessed the documentation on our surface business liquidity. The same vulnerability assessment." He stopped, pressed his fingers against his eyes. "The same documentation my mother originally provided to Park." "He was updating it," Nia said. "Giving Park current numbers," Taejun said, "before the call window opens, making sure the attack is calibrated to where we actually are right now, not where we were 2 years ago." "Did he transmit anything?" "We don't know yet." He lowered his hands. His eyes were red-rimmed, not from tears, from the specific rawness of too many hours without sleep and too much adrenaline in a short window. "Jong's team is working on his device." "And Do-hyun himself?" Taejun's jaw tightened. "He's not talking." Nia absorbed this. "Can Han Ji-sung get to him?" "Han Ji-sung is with him now." They sat with that for a moment. 3 days, she said. 3 days, he said. Day 7 was the day Madame Seo came. She didn't call ahead. She never did. But this time, when Nia heard the shoes in the entryway, she felt something different from all the previous times. Not dread, not the bracing for contact with something cold and disapproving, but a kind of clarity. The calm of knowing what was actually true and not needing to pretend otherwise. Taejun was not home. He was with Han Ji-sung and 2 of his most trusted operational people, working on the counterstructure they were building against the consortium's call. He had not yet spoken to his mother. Nia knew he was going to have to, and she knew he was not ready, and she had not pushed. Madame Seo came into the living room. She looked different. Nia noticed it immediately. Not physically. The older woman was still perfectly composed, perfectly dressed. But something in the arrangement of her face had changed. Something that had always been held at a precise tension was slightly, almost imperceptibly, less tight. She sat. Nia sat. "Does he know?" Madame Seo said. Nia looked at her. "Does Taejun know?" the older woman repeated. About what I did." "Yes," Nia said. Madame Seo absorbed this. Her hands were in her lap, folded in the way they always were, the same controlled posture. But the knuckles, Nia noticed, were not entirely steady. I didn't know what Park would do with it, she said. I know, Nia said. Han Ji-sung was very careful to explain that. I thought, Madame Seo stopped. It was, Nia realized, possibly the first time she had seen the woman stop in the middle of a sentence because she'd run out of the right words, rather than because she was choosing them for effect. I thought I was being practical. I thought I was protecting the family's future by trying to remove me from it, Nia said. Not heated, just true. Madame Seo looked at her directly. Yes. The word cost her. Nia could see it costing her. The specific expense of a woman who had spent 70-something years being correct about everything, admitting plainly that she had not been. You gave an enemy a map of your own son's vulnerabilities, Nia said, because you believed that his most significant vulnerability was me. I believed you were a liability, Madame Seo said. Her voice was steady, but the steadiness was working. I believed that a foreign woman, a woman with no formal position in the family, was an instability the organization could not afford. I believed that Taejun's attachment to you was preventing him from making rational decisions about the dynasty's future. And now? Nia said. Madame Seo was quiet for a long moment. Now I have watched you spend 6 days inside a crisis that I created, she said, reading financial documents and meeting with Im Soyeon, and sitting in that chair at 1 a.m. when my son comes home from something terrible, and she stopped again. I was wrong about what liability means. Nia held the older woman's gaze. I need to speak with Taejun, Madame Seo said. I know he's not here. I'm not asking you to arrange it. I'm telling you because… She looked down at her hands. Because I think you deserve to know that I'm going to tell him everything. What I did and why. Not through Han Ji-sung's documentation. From me. Why are you telling me first? Nia asked. The older woman raised her eyes. Because you are the person in this house who has the right to be told first, she said. And I am trying to do things in the correct order. The silence that followed was unlike any silence Nia had shared with Madame Seo before. Not the silence of opposition, two people holding their ground against each other. Something different. The silence of two women sitting in the same house, in the same crisis, on the same side of something for the first time. It was Nia who spoke. He'll be back tonight, she said. Late. But tonight. Madame Seo nodded once. She stayed until 5 in the afternoon, which was unprecedented. They did not have a conversation that remade 20 years of history. They had tea. They talked about the pregnancy, medical details, practical ones, the kind of conversation Nia had imagined having with the grandmother of her child in a completely different register. It was halting and imperfect, and in some places almost painful. It was also the first honest conversation they had ever had. Day 8 was when Park moved early. Not the full instrument call, 3 days too soon for that, the legal window wasn't open. But an investigative journalist appeared, and then a second one, and then a financial news outlet ran a piece on irregularities in the Kang Foundation's international grant structure. Not accurate, not entirely fabricated, precisely calibrated to create doubt and instability in the surface business partners whose confidence held the legitimate side of the empire together. A pressure move. Make the Kang structure shake before the formal instruments could be called, so that the call looked like a response to instability rather than the cause of it. Taejun found out at 7 in the morning. He had not slept. He called a meeting in the study. Nia, Min Seok, Han Ji-sung via phone, and 2 others whose roles in the organization Nia understood were enforcement adjacent and whose names she had heard but whose faces she was seeing clearly for the first time. The room was crowded and tense, and the air had the specific quality of people who are all running on too little sleep and too much urgency. Park is compressing the timeline, Han Ji-sung said over the phone. He's trying to force a response from us that looks defensive. If we push back on the journalist piece, we confirm there's something to push back on. If we don't push back, we look like we can't, Taejun said. Correct. What about Choi? Taejun said. Is he out of the consortium? He's moving, Han Ji-sung said. He confirmed yesterday, but moving quietly. He's not going to make a public statement. He's just going to be unavailable when Park calls the instruments. And Im? Taejun looked at Nia. Im Soyeon called me this morning, Nia said. Her father is out. He's instructed his legal team to contest the instrument call on procedural grounds. It won't stop it permanently, but it creates a delay and a paper trail that implicates the consortium's structure in ways Park hasn't fully accounted for. Two pieces of the consortium destabilized. The journalist piece still running, Do-hyun still not talking, and one day until the call window opened. What do we have on Do-hyun? Taejun asked. One of the two men whose names she was learning, a compact, quiet man named Seo Young-gul, who was not related to Madame Seo, spoke for the first time. He transmitted before we got to him, he said. Partial file. The liquidity numbers, not the full structure. Park has updated numbers but not updated context. Which means Park's attack is calibrated to numbers that are real, but to a structure we're already moving, Taejun said. If we finish moving before the call window, we have to finish moving today, Taejun said. The room absorbed this. Today. The restructuring of the surface business liquidity that would take the bite out of Park's instrument call, moving assets, reclassifying holdings, executing a set of transactions that Han Ji-sung's team had been preparing for 6 days, had to be complete in the next 14 hours. It's possible, Han Ji-sung said. Tight, but possible. Make it happen, Taejun said. Everyone moved at once. What followed was the longest day of Nia's adult life, including the day her mother died, including the day she left Lagos for the last time, including the day she took her first pregnancy test 7 weeks ago in a bathroom in this city and sat on the edge of the tub for 20 minutes without moving. She was not an operational member of the Kang organization. She had no role in the financial restructuring. She sat in the study and fielded calls from Im Soyeon about the procedural contestation, and she talked to Han Ji-sung twice about the documentation they were building on Park's consortium structure that would, if everything else fell into place, form the basis of a conversation with certain regulatory contacts that would make Park's financial future significantly more complicated. And in between those calls, she sat with the pregnancy in her body and the child's heartbeat that she'd heard on a monitor 5 days ago, and she thought about what her mother would say about all of this. And she thought the answer was probably something extremely direct and not particularly comforting, which was exactly what she needed. Taejun came to find her at 4 in the afternoon. He looked like a man who had been running for 8 days on the reserves of something that was almost gone. There were shadows under his eyes that had moved past ordinary tiredness into something more structural. He stood in the doorway of the study and looked at her, and the look had in it everything that 8 days and a lifetime had built between them. The restructuring is going to make it, he said. Han Ji-sung says by 10 tonight it'll be complete. Good, she said. Min Seok is handling the last piece of the Im contestation paperwork. He came into the room, sat down across from her. Choi is unreachable, which is what we needed. And Park? Doesn't know yet what he's walking into. He paused. Tomorrow he calls the instruments and finds a structure that isn't where he thinks it is, 2 consortium members who aren't performing, and a procedural contestation that creates a 2-week delay during which Han Ji-sung's regulatory documentation reaches the people it needs to reach. And Do-hyun? Taejun's expression tightened. Do-hyun is a separate problem, a family problem, not today's problem. Nia looked at him. Your mother is coming tonight, she said. I told her you'd be back. He was still. You spoke with her. She came here. Day 7. Nia held his gaze. She needs to tell you herself. I'm not going to summarize it. But she's coming tonight and I want you to hear her. His jaw worked. Taejun, she said. Hear her. He looked at the desk between them, at the papers, at his hands. She tried to have you removed from a room, he said. She gave Park information that put you and our child at risk. Yes, Nia said. She did both of those things. And she did the first one for 20 years, in smaller ways that you let happen. She kept her voice level. I'm not excusing it. I'm asking you to hear her. You can be furious and still hear her. Both things are available to you. He looked at her. The exhaustion in his face was complete and real, and she did not try to make it better. How are you this? He stopped. How? I'm not calm, she said again. I've just been carrying things for a long time. At 9:47 that night, Han Ji-sung confirmed the restructuring was complete. Taejun was on the phone when the confirmation came through. Nia watched him receive it. The specific release of a man whose body has been holding something for 8 days and is only now able to put it down. His shoulders dropped, fractionally. But she saw it. He ended the call. He looked at her across the room. "Done," he said. She breathed. Madame Seo arrived at 10:15, precisely when she'd said she would. She came into the house and found them both in the living room, Taejun standing by the window, Nia on the couch. And she stopped in the doorway and looked at her son. The look between them was 58 years of history and the specific devastation of something broken that both people can see and neither knows yet if it can be held. Madame Seo sat down across from her son. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Everything." Taejun looked at her for a long moment. Then he sat down. And the most feared man in Seoul sat in his own living room, 8 days of war in his body and blood from a gala still faintly visible in the scar on his palm, and listened to his mother tell him the truth about what she had done and why, while the woman he loved sat nearby and the city outside went on doing what cities do, enormous, indifferent, turning. At 11:50, the conversation between Taejun and his mother reached the moment Nia had known was coming, the moment where everything said had been said, and what remained was the space between saying and deciding, that specific suspended place where a relationship either breaks completely or finds some new shape it hasn't been before. Taejun stood. He walked to the window. His mother sat with her hands in her lap, steadier than she had been when she arrived, in the way people sometimes are when they've put down something they've been carrying and find the weight of it is less than the carrying. He turned. "I'm not going to forgive this tonight," he said. Madame Seo absorbed this without flinching. "I know," she said. "But I'm going to need you to help us finish it," he said. "Tomorrow. There are calls you can make that I can't make, family contacts, the network you've built across 40 years. There are people who will pick up for you who won't pick up for me." Madame Seo looked at him. Something in her expression did something complicated. "You're asking me to help fix what I broke," she said. "I'm asking you to fight for this family," he said, "the way you've always told me you were doing." His voice was hard and exhausted and entirely real. "Prove it." The room was very still. Madame Seo turned. She looked at Nia, directly, without the careful management of every previous look she'd given her across 20 years. "I would like to be present," she said. "Tomorrow, when it's over." Nia looked at her. "Then be here," Nia said. "Tomorrow." Day 9. The call window. Park Seung-won was going to pick up a phone and discover that 3 years of architecture had shifted under his feet in 8 days, and that the woman he'd never accounted for, too old, too foreign, too ordinary for the Kang dynasty, had been at the center of every move that had undone him. Taejun turned from the window. He looked at Nia with an expression that had in it something she had waited a very long time to see clearly. Not love as a private thing, held back from the world. Love as a commitment, solid and visible and entirely without apology. "Tomorrow," he said. She met his eyes. "Tomorrow," she said. And the clock moved toward midnight, and the last night before the final day settled over the house. And somewhere in the city park, Seung-won was still certain he had won, and Kang Taejun was in a room thinking about what came next for him, and Im So-yeon was reading contestation paperwork, and Han Ji-sung was not sleeping, and Amara was awake in her room with her phone face down and her heart in her throat. And the Kang Empire that had taken 30 years to build was still standing, changed but standing, like everything that survived something that was meant to destroy it. Park Seung-won made the call at 9:03 in the morning. Taejun knew the exact minute because Han Ji-sung had people watching Park's office building in Yeouido. And the confirmation came through as a text to Taejun's phone while he was standing in the kitchen drinking coffee he couldn't taste, still in the clothes he'd worn the night before, having not slept for the second consecutive night. He read the text. He set the phone face down on the counter. He picked up his coffee and drank it. Nia watched him from across the kitchen. She had slept 4 hours. Not well, but 4 hours, which was more than him. And she was dressed and had eaten and was sitting with her hands around her own cup in the posture she'd developed over the last 9 days. The posture of a woman who had decided that stillness was the most useful thing she could offer to a situation that kept threatening to become chaos. "He called it," Taejun said. "I know," she said. She'd seen his face when the text came through. Han Ji-sung is already moving? He called me at 8:40, she said. He was already at his office. Taejun looked at the phone on the counter. He looked at the window. Outside, Seoul was doing what it always did, going about its enormous life, traffic and pedestrians, and the low constant noise of a city of 10 million people who did not know or care that a 3-year financial siege was being countered in a kitchen in this house. He turned. "How are you feeling?" It was not the question she'd expected. "I'm okay," she said. Then, because they had agreed somewhere in the last 9 days to stop having that particular kind of conversation, the managed, careful kind, she said, "Tired, a little nauseous, scared about today." "Me too," he said. He put his cup in the sink. He straightened his jacket. He looked at her in a way that she recognized, the look he gave her when he was about to walk into something and he needed to locate himself first, and she was the place he looked to do that. "Stay inside today," he said. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. He nodded once. He crossed the kitchen, stopped beside her chair, and put his hand briefly against the side of her face, just his palm against her cheek. 4 seconds, no more. And then he walked out. She listened to the front door close. She sat in the kitchen and breathed. The instrument call hit the Kang organization's surface business structure at 9:15. Taejun was in a car. Han Ji-sung was in his office. The two financial associates had been working since midnight, and the restructured holdings that Park's consortium expected to find sitting vulnerable and exposed were not where they'd been 26 months ago when Madame Seo handed over the vulnerability map. They were not where Do-hyun's partial files said they were. They had been moved, reclassified, and in some cases dissolved and rebuilt under structures that Park's instruments had no legal claim against. Han Ji-sung described it later as watching someone throw a punch at a jaw that had already stepped sideways. The consortium's call generated paperwork. The paperwork generated responses from the Kang legal team. The Im family contestation dropped simultaneously, forcing a procedural review that froze the most significant instrument cluster for 14 days. Assemblyman Choi was not available, had not been available since day 7, and his absence from the consortium meant one of the 4 signature requirements for the accelerated call process was simply not present. Park called Choi's office at 9:47. He called twice more before 10. He did not reach him. At 10:20, one of Park's own consortium partners, a real estate developer named Baek, who had been the least committed member of the 4 from the beginning, a man who had signed on because he trusted Park's reputation for clean wins, and who was now watching a clean win fail to materialize in real time, called Park directly to ask what was happening. Min Seok, who had a source inside Baek's organization, relayed the contents of that call to Taejun at 10:35. Baek was pulling out. That left Park with 2 functional consortium members, 1 frozen instrument cluster, a procedural contestation in the courts, and a set of assets that had simply moved out from under him. It also left him with the documentation Han Ji-sung had spent 9 days assembling. Documentation that was, at 10:45 on day 9, delivered by private courier to a specific contact in the Financial Services Commission who had been waiting for it. Park Sung-won did not know, yet, that the documentation existed. He found out at noon. Taejun was in a meeting room in a building in Jongno when his phone showed a call from a number he recognized as a routing number, Park, sometimes used through intermediaries. He looked at the screen. He let it ring 4 times. He answered. "Park," he said. The voice on the other end was controlled, very controlled. The voice of a man who had built something over 3 years and was in the process of understanding that it was not going to hold. "There appears to have been a misunderstanding," Park said, "about the scope of our arrangement." "I don't think there was a misunderstanding," Taejun said. "I think you understood exactly what you were building and you believed I wouldn't find it in time." A pause. "The documentation you've sent to the FSC," Park said. "That's a significant escalation." "I'd call it a response," Taejun said. "You escalated when you turned my mother's mistake into a hostile takeover plan." Another pause. Longer. "What do you want?" Park said. Stripped of the framing language, just the question. "I want you to close the consortium," Taejun said. "Formally. I want the instruments retired, not suspended. I want Baek and whoever else is still nominally inside to sign off on dissolution documents that Han Ji-sung's team will draft." He paused. "And I want you to understand clearly that the FSC documentation doesn't go away when you do this. It remains on record, which means that the next time you consider building something like this, using other people's family situations as your infrastructure, you do so knowing that I still have it. Silence. You're not going to move on me publicly, Park said. Not a question, an assessment. Not if you close the consortium, Taejun said. If you don't, I will. Another silence, shorter. I'll have my people contact Han Ji-sung, Park said. The call ended. Taejun set the phone on the table in front of him. He sat in the meeting room, alone, in the specific stillness that follows the end of something that has taken everything you had. His hands were flat on the table. His breathing was slow and measured. Outside the window, Seoul was still going. He called Nia. She answered on the first ring. It's done, he said. She was quiet for a moment on the other end. He could hear her breathing. Come home, she said. He came home. Min Seok was already at the house when Taejun arrived. He'd been there since 11, managing the paperwork relay between Han Ji-sung and the Im family's legal team, working at the kitchen table with his sleeves rolled up and 3 empty coffee cups beside him in a way that made him look, Nia thought, less like a lieutenant in a criminal organization and more like a graduate student finishing a thesis that was due in an hour. He stood when Taejun came in. The two brothers looked at each other across the kitchen. No embrace. They were not men who did that, not in front of others, maybe not at all, which was a specific kind of damage from a specific kind of upbringing that Nia recognized without being able to name the clinical term for it. But Min Seok's face did something that was clearly relief, and Taejun's mouth compressed in the way that meant he was holding something more significant than he was showing, and they stood for a moment like that. Park is closing it? Min Seok said. He's closing it, Taejun said. Min Seok nodded. He picked up his coffee cup, set it down again. Do-hyun, he said. Just the name. I know, Taejun said. That conversation, I said I know. Min Seok was quiet. He looked at Nia briefly. She looked back at him steadily, and he looked back at his brother, and nobody said anything for a moment. Later, Taejun said. Do-hyun is later. Today, I need... He stopped. He looked around the kitchen. This kitchen. Mrs. Park's coffee cups and Amara's breakfast dishes still in the drying rack, and the documents Min Seok had been working on stacked at the table's edge. I need today to just be today. Min Seok understood. He gathered his papers. He said he'd be at his own place if anything developed. He left through the side entrance the way he'd come in. Taejun sat down at the kitchen table. He sat there for a long time, not moving, not speaking, in the way of a man whose body has finally been given permission to stop. Nia made tea. Not because tea fixed anything, but because her hands needed to do something, and because this was a thing she knew how to do, and sometimes what a person needed was to be in a room where someone else was doing something ordinary. She put the cup in front of him. She sat beside him, not across. Tell me how you are, she said. He looked at the tea. I don't know yet, he said. I think I won't know for a few days. He turned the cup slowly. We won. Yes, she said. It doesn't feel like I thought it would. It never does, she said. That's not a flaw. That's just what's true. He turned to look at her, directly, the full weight of it. I need to ask you something, he said, and I need you to answer it honestly, without managing how it lands. She held his gaze. All right. Do you want to stay? He said. Not because of the baby. Not because we're in the middle of something. After all of this, everything it's cost you. Do you want to be here? She looked at him for a long moment. 20 years. This kitchen. This city. The years she'd spent learning a language and building a life inside a world that didn't fully claim her. The years of being just adjacent to belonging. The years of the specific loneliness of loving someone enormously and not being sure they would choose you when it was expensive. I stayed through worse than this, she said, when I had no reason to believe it would become something better. She paused. I'm still here. That's not an answer, he said. That's a history. It's both, she said. Yes, I want to stay. She held his eyes. But not the way I've been staying, not invisibly. I know, he said. I need you to understand what that means in practice, she said. Not just the announcement, not the gala moment, the daily version, the version where I'm included in decisions, the version where your family, All of them know that I am the person you chose and not the person you're managing. I know, he said again. I've been very patient, she said. Too patient, he said. I know that too. He put his hand over hers on the table. I'm going to spend a long time trying to make that right. I don't know if I know how, but I'm going to try. She looked at his hand over hers, the scar on his palm, the man she'd laughed at in the rain in Incheon 22 years ago, and everything that had come after. Start today, she said. Start with the small things, the daily things. Let that be enough for now. He turned his hand over and held hers properly. All right, he said. The conversation with Kang Taejun happened 3 days later. Taejun had it alone. He did not tell Nia in advance, not to exclude her, she understood, but because this was a specific category of the damage, the kind that existed inside the organization's bloodlines in a way that required him to enter it by himself. She did not ask to be included. She waited. He came home after 4 hours, and she knew from the way he moved through the door that it had not been resolved in any clean sense, because these things never resolved cleanly, and she had known that going in. He sat in the study. She came and sat across from him. He thought he was protecting the family, Taejun said. That's what he told me. He said it like the words tasted wrong. He thought the surface businesses were vulnerable in ways I wasn't willing to address, and he thought Park's consortium would absorb them cleanly, keep them functional, just under different management. He thought he was doing a controlled transfer, Nia said. He thought I was going to lose them anyway, Taejun said, and he made a deal to make sure they survived it. His jaw tightened. He was wrong about all of it, about Park's intentions, about what the consortium would actually do, about whether I could address the vulnerabilities he didn't bring to me. He paused. He also didn't bring them to me. Because he didn't trust you to fix them, Nia said. Because he stopped trusting me somewhere along the way and didn't tell me that either, Taejun said. 20 years. He decided I was going to fail and made alternative arrangements and never said a word. The room was quiet. What happens to him? She asked. He was silent for a moment. He's out of the organization, he said. That's permanent. There are other considerations given the scope of what he authorized. Han Ji-sung is handling the formal structure of that. He won't be comfortable. But he won't be... He stopped. He was in my house at Christmas for 20 years. I know, she said. That doesn't excuse it, he said. No, she said. It doesn't. It's just also true. He looked at her. You're very good at holding both things. I've had practice, she said. The conversation with Madame Seo was harder to describe because it happened in pieces, over multiple weeks, in the incremental and nonlinear way that real reconciliation moves between people who have a long history of not being honest with each other. The first piece happened the day after Park's consortium formally dissolved, when Madame Seo came to the house and sat across from her son and told him, in the same spare and costly language she'd used with Nia, what she had done and why. Taejun listened. He did not interrupt. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. You've spent 40 years keeping this family together, he said finally, and in the process, you've spent 40 years deciding what the family was, who was in it, what it needed. He looked at her steadily. You decided that without asking me. And when you thought I was making the wrong decision about Nia, you went around me rather than telling me you were afraid. Madame Seo did not flinch. Yes. Were you afraid? He said. Not strategically. Were you actually afraid? A long silence. I was afraid, she said, that you would choose her and lose everything, that the organization would collapse without a proper succession structure, that I would watch you build something and give it to someone who couldn't hold it. She paused. I was afraid of being wrong about what the family needed, and so I stopped asking and started deciding. Taejun absorbed this. Nia has held more of this family together in the last 9 days than anyone else in this room, he said, including me. Madame Seo looked at her hands. I know, she said. Then you know what I'm going to say next. The older woman raised her eyes. Yes. Say it anyway. Madame Seo was quiet for a moment. Then she looked toward the door, through which Nia was not visible, was in another room of the house going about the quiet work of a woman who had decided not to perform her own vindication. She belongs here, Madame Seo said. She has belonged here. I was wrong to make her feel otherwise. The words cost more than they looked like they cost. Taejun could see it costing her, and he did not make it easier because making it easier would have been a kindness that let her put the weight down too soon. Tell her, he said. Not me. The second piece happened 2 weeks later. Nia was in the garden. She'd started spending time there in the afternoons, a new habit, the pregnancy giving her body a need for air and movement that her previous life hadn't quite had. She heard footsteps on the stone path and turned to find Madame Seo standing at the garden's edge in a coat slightly too formal for the occasion, which was simply being in a garden. Nia waited. Madame Seo walked to the bench Nia had been sitting on. She did not sit. She stood, looking at the garden, and then she turned and looked at Nia with an expression that had been stripped of every layer of management, every calculation, every practiced quality. An old woman's face, just that. I have treated you, Madame Seo said, as though your presence in my son's life was an error to be corrected. She paused. I have done this for 20 years, and I did it because I was afraid, and because I had long ago confused control with love, and because it was easier to decide you didn't belong than to examine why your belonging threatened me. Nia stood in the garden and listened. I cannot take 20 years back, Madame Seo said. I know that. I'm not asking you to... She stopped. I'm not asking for anything. I simply wanted to say this to you, directly, without my son in the room as a reason. The garden was quiet. Somewhere over the wall, a vehicle passed on the street. Why does my belonging threaten you? Nia said, not aggressively, actually asking. Madame Seo looked at her for a moment. Because you don't need us, she said. You never did. You came into this family with your own business, and your own history, and your own language, and your daughter, and you built a life here without requiring our permission, and you survived 20 years of being excluded without breaking. A pause. I spent my life being necessary to this family. It is the only form of safety I have ever known. And you walked into it being entirely self-sufficient, and I... She stopped. I could not locate you. I did not know where to put you. Nia stood in the garden with the winter light coming through the bare branches and the child growing inside her and 20 years of accumulated things, and she looked at a woman who had just told her, in the most oblique possible way, that she had been punished for not needing to be saved. It was not absolution. It was not enough. It did not undo 20 years of being made to feel like an uninvited guest in the house she lived in. But it was true. And Nia had always had more use for true things than for comfortable ones. I would like my daughter, Nia said, to know her grandmother. Madame Seo's face did something that was not quite crying. She was not, it appeared, a woman who cried easily or perhaps at all, but something adjacent to it, the near miss of an emotion that her body had spent 70 years learning to reroute. I would like that, she said. They did not embrace. They were not there yet, and perhaps would never be entirely there, because some distances close only part way, and that partial closing is still a kind of arrival. But they stood in the garden together in the winter light, and neither of them moved away from the other, and that was its own true thing. The marriage happened in April. Not a ceremony that looked like the ones people expected from the Kang family. No ballroom, no 300 guests, no performance of power dressed up as celebration. A small room in a registry office, Han Ji-sung as a witness, Min Seok standing slightly awkwardly in a good suit, Amara beside her mother with dry eyes, and a jaw set in the specific way that meant she was working very hard to keep them dry. And Madame Seo in the back of the room. She had asked if she could come. Nia had said yes. Nia wore a deep blue dress that Amara had found. Not white, not a traditional anything, just a dress she felt herself in, which she had decided was the only criterion that mattered. She was 5 months pregnant. The dress acknowledged this rather than concealing it. She had stopped concealing things. Taejun wore a dark suit and looked at her throughout the ceremony with an expression that had none of the controlled professional neutrality she'd spent 20 years learning to read and everything else underneath it, visible and unmanaged. The face of a man who understood exactly what it had cost to arrive at this moment and was not pretending otherwise. The officials said the words. They said the words back. Han Ji-sung handed over a ring that Taejun had chosen. Not ostentatious, not a statement, just a piece of jewelry chosen by a man who had finally stopped making choices based on what they communicated to other people. He put it on her finger. She held his hand. The scar on his palm from the gala glass was still there, faint, white, permanent. Done, he said quietly. Done, she said. Amara in the back of the room made a sound that was definitely not crying and looked at the ceiling. Liana Kang Okafor was born on a cold morning in late May. Not dramatically. Not in the way the story around her had been dramatic. She arrived with the ordinary, extraordinary violence of all births, the specific reality of it, and Nia was not graceful about it and did not pretend to be. She was 60 years old, and she was exhausted before it started, and she was more exhausted when it was over, and she did not look like anyone's image of a serene mother in the golden aftermath. Taejun held his daughter for the first time standing beside Nia's hospital bed, and he was entirely still, which was how she knew he was completely undone. He stood there with this small person in his arms, and he said nothing for a long time. "She's small," he said finally. "They're all small," Nia said. Her voice came out rough and stripped. "She has your—" He turned slightly and looked at Nia, then back at the baby. "She looks like both of us." "That's generally how it works," Nia said. He looked at her. His eyes were not dry, which was the first time in 20 years she had seen that, and she was too exhausted to say anything about it, which was perhaps the correct response. Amara came in 20 minutes later. She stood at the end of the bed and looked at her mother with 28 years of knowing each other in her face, and then she looked at the baby, and then she sat down in the chair beside the bed and put her face in her hands for approximately 30 seconds. "She's hideous," Amara said. "She's perfect." "She looks like her father," Nia said. "I know," Amara said. "That's the problem." Taejun looked at Amara. Amara looked at Taejun. It was not warm exactly. They were not built for easy warmth with each other. But it was real. Two people who had orbited the same center for 30 years, and finally acknowledged that the orbit had made them, despite everything, something like family. "Thank you," Taejun said. He said it quietly, and it was unclear whether he meant for being here or for something larger, something that covered the years of Amara growing up in his house, and never asking him to be something he wasn't even when it cost her. Amara looked at him for a moment. "Don't waste it," she said, which was, for her, approximately the same as a declaration of peace. Madame Seo came to the hospital in the afternoon. She sat beside Nia's bed and held Liana for 20 minutes with the practiced ease of a woman who had raised children and knew how to hold a small person without performing it. She did not say very much. She looked at the baby. She looked at Nia once, briefly, with an expression that Nia accepted for what it was. "She has strong hands," Madame Seo said. "She does," Nia said. "Good," said Madame Seo. And that was sufficient. The announcement that Taejun put out, not a press release, not a formal statement, just a simple factual disclosure through the Kang Foundation's communications channel, ran to 3 sentences. His wife, Nia Kang Okafor. Their daughter, Liana. The names of both, not hidden, not managed, not presented as a footnote to something more important. The response from Seoul's social and business world was exactly what you'd expect. A mix of genuine surprise, performed outrage from certain quarters, and the rapid recalibration that happens in any closed world when a fixed piece moves. There were think pieces. There were opinions from people who had never met either of them. There were people who had spent 20 years calling her the foreign mistress, who now had to refile her in a category for which they had no ready template. Nia did not read most of it. She was busy. She was busy with a newborn, which was its own form of total warfare, and which at 60 was a different experience than it had been at 32 with Amara. Harder in some ways, the body's recovery slower, the exhaustion more complete. But she had Taejun, who had promised the small daily things and was delivering them in the unglamorous specific reality of 3 a.m. feedings and trying to decode an infant's communication and falling asleep in chairs still holding a baby and waking up with a crick in his neck and doing it again the next night. This was, Nia thought, the version of him she had waited 20 years to see. Not the feared public figure, not the controlled operator, the man who learned to change a diaper at 58 with the concentrated focus of someone learning a new technical skill, who asked questions without embarrassment, who stayed awake when she couldn't sleep. Not because it was romantic, but because he'd decided that being present meant being present for the 4 a.m. version too. He was not perfect at it. He made mistakes, misread cues, fell back occasionally into the habits of a man who had spent decades operating on the principle that delegation was efficiency. But he came back. Every time he came back and tried differently. That was the thing. she'd decided. Not the grand gesture in the ballroom, not the proposal. The coming back and trying differently, over and over, in the daily non-cinematic version of a life. 3 years later, the Nia Okafor Foundation held its annual dinner in Seoul. Different from the Kang Foundation's gala. No ballroom, no crystal, no performance of hierarchy. A large conference space, functional, filled with women from 17 countries, most of them entrepreneurs at various stages of building something from not much. Nia stood at the front of the room and looked out at them. She was 63. She had not become someone different in 3 years. She had become more precisely herself, which was not the same thing. Her hair was natural and uncompromised. She was heavier than she'd been at the gala and felt entirely at home in her own body, which was something it had taken 6 decades and one unexpected pregnancy to fully achieve. She talked for 20 minutes, not about herself, about the foundation's work, about the businesses the first 3 cohorts had built, about the specific and unglamorous reality of building something from nothing inside systems that aren't designed for you. She was funny sometimes. She was direct in ways that made certain people in the room uncomfortable, and she did not modulate for their comfort. She did not talk about the Kang family. She did not talk about the gala, or Park Seung-won, or 9 days of financial siege and the consortium that had dissolved under its own structural failures. Those things had happened, and they were part of her, but they were not the text of this particular evening. When she finished, the room applauded in the way rooms do when they've actually heard something. She stepped back from the podium and found Taejun in the crowd immediately. She always found him immediately, the way you find a landmark you know by heart. He was standing to the side of the room, not on a stage, not at the center. He met her eyes across the crowd, and the look between them was unremarkable from the outside, just 2 people across a room, and it contained everything. Amara was beside him, holding Liana, who was 2 years old and had recently discovered opinions about most things, and was in the process of expressing one to her sister with considerable force. Amara was conducting the negotiation with the patient focus of a woman who had grown up the child of Nia Okafor, and therefore had significant experience with people who expressed their opinions clearly. Min Seok was somewhere in the crowd. He had come, which was its own statement, and which 3 years earlier would have been a different kind of statement than it was now. He and Nia had arrived at something that was not warm exactly, but was honest, a mutual recognition of the other's complexity, which was enough. Madame Seo was not at the dinner. She was at Taejun's house, which was also Nia's house, which was also Liana's house, doing what she had come to do on Tuesday afternoons for the last 18 months, spending time with her granddaughter. She was learning, in her 70s, a form of presence that did not require control. She was not good at it yet. She was trying. Liana, who had no investment in the weight of history and was entirely interested in the present moment, seemed to find her acceptable. That was, in its way, the most accurate resolution available. Han Ji-sung retired 6 months after the consortium dissolved. He was 68, and the 9-day siege had cost him something that only manifested afterward in the form of a tiredness that wouldn't lift. He moved to a smaller city on the coast. He called Taejun occasionally. He called Nia once, on the day the foundation was formally registered. "I told Taejun years ago," he said, "that you were the person best positioned to hold him together." "I heard," she said. "I was right," he said. "You were also right that he needed to hold himself together," she said. "I didn't do that part." A pause. "No," Han Ji-sung said. "He did. Eventually." Another pause. "That's the correct order." Park Seung-won was the subject of an FSC investigation that moved slowly, as financial investigations do, through 18 months of documentation review and subpoenas and the specific grinding bureaucratic process of building a case against a man with significant resources to resist it. The outcome was not a dramatic courtroom moment. It was a consent agreement, substantial financial penalties, a restructuring mandate, and the kind of quiet professional destruction that is more thorough than any single visible defeat, because it simply removes the foundation a person has been standing on and leaves them to figure out what comes next. Nia did not follow it closely. She had enough to follow. Do-hyun left Seoul. Taejun did not know where, or if he did not say, and Nia did not ask. The door on that part of the story had been closed with the specific finality of something that had cost too much to revisit. On an evening in late autumn, 3.5 years after the gala, Nia sat in the garden with Liana asleep against her shoulder. The child had the particular dense warmth of a sleeping toddler, the complete unconscious weight of it, which was simultaneously exhausting and the most grounding physical sensation Nia had ever experienced. She sat on the bench, the same bench where Madame Seo had come to find her in the winter light, and she held her daughter and she looked at the garden, which had changed across 3 years of her actually spending time in it, actually caring for it. Taejun came out at some point. He sat beside her without asking if she wanted company, because after 22 years he knew the difference between her wanting solitude and her wanting presence, and right now she wanted presence. I was quiet. He looked at Liana sleeping. She said a full sentence today, Nia said. I heard, he said. Amara sent me a voice memo. What did you think? I thought she sounded like you, he said. Nia looked down at the child on her shoulder, the small face entirely relaxed in sleep, the breath slow and even. A bridge between two worlds, she had called her, when she was trying to find language for what this child was. Two cultures. Two people who were never supposed to belong together. But that framing, she'd come to think, was incomplete. Liana was not a symbol of anything. She was a person, growing into her own specific self, and the work ahead was not to make her into a bridge or a statement or a resolution. The work was to make sure she grew up knowing that she was enough as exactly what she was, without needing the world's permission. That was the actual work. Nia knew that better than most. I was thinking, she said, about the rain. Which rain? Taejun said. Incheon, she said, the first night. He was quiet for a moment. The car. You looked so completely helpless, she said. The most feared man in Korea standing in the rain with a dead phone. You laughed at me, he said. I did, she said. You laughed too. I did, he said. They sat with that for a moment. The garden, the evening, the child between them. If I'd known, Nia said, everything that was coming, the 20 years of it, the cost of it. Would you have stayed in the car? He said, quietly. She thought about it. She thought about it honestly, which was the only way she'd ever done anything. No, she said, but I would have asked for more sooner. I would have made myself harder to overlook. I would have been worth asking, he said. I should have made that clear earlier. I wasn't brave enough. No, she said. You weren't. He absorbed this. He didn't try to correct it. I'm trying to be, he said. I know, she said. That's why I'm still here. Liana shifted in her sleep, a small adjustment, some interior recalibration of the dream she was having. She settled again. Her hand, small and certain, found Nia's arm and held on. The garden was quiet. The city was out there beyond the walls, enormous and indifferent as always, full of people with their own impossible things. The autumn was doing what autumn did, making everything briefly beautiful before it let it go. Nia sat in it, the weight of her daughter, the warmth of the man beside her, the long, strange road of the life she had built and defended and refused to surrender, even when surrendering would have been so much easier. She had not surrendered. That was the thing, in the end, that she wanted Liana to know. Not the dramatic version, not the ballroom and the shattered glass and the 9-day siege, the daily version. The version where you get up in the morning and you take up exactly the space you need and you refuse to apologize for existing and you love fiercely and imperfectly and without guarantees. The version where you stay, not because you have no other options, but because you have chosen this, specifically with your eyes fully open. The woman everyone once called an outsider held her daughter in a garden in Seoul and felt the weight of 63 years of a life that had not gone according to any plan she'd made and found it sufficient. More than sufficient. She looked up at the sky above the garden, dark now, a few stars visible through the city's light, and she breathed. The most ordinary and essential thing.